When Square announced they're going to remaster one of my favorite PSP games, I was both shocked and excited. I never expected them to re-release Crisis Core, but they could not have chosen a better time with Rebirth coming out in order to bring in lots of new players and show us just how integral Zack Fair is to the Final Fantasy VII story. For this video, I'll be providing my interpretations and analysis of the story and its character arcs, as well as how it all ties together in my overall interpretations of the theme of this game, which I feel can be somewhat confusing to a newer player. From there, I'll discuss my overall thoughts on the game's mechanics, overall gameplay, and closing comments as well. Combat mode engaged. Our prologue of the story starts off with Zack, who is at this point a soldier second-class operative, and is tasked with taking out the Wutai troops disguised as Shinra operatives. This also serves as a game introduction to combat mechanics and how it's been adjusted for Reunion. We'll talk more about the combat later in the video though. After you dispatch the Wutai, you are met with another battle against the Behemoth, where you get to learn about your limit breaks and DMW. For new players, this is particularly helpful since not everyone had the chance to play the original on the PSP. Once you've taken down the Behemoth, Sephiroth steps in to challenge you to a sword fight. As you can imagine, Zack isn't quite on the level of Sephiroth and gets taken down before Angeal comes in to put an end to it, before something bad even happens. But guess what? None of it's real anyway, and you've been in a training simulation this whole time. Sephiroth himself wasn't even really real. As Angeal ends his simulation, there's another very important piece of dialogue mentioned: embrace your dreams. If you want to be a hero, you need to have dreams and honor. Pretty important foreshadowing for what comes later, and sets the catalyst for a dominant theme in this game. At the end of the prologue, Kunsei tells Zack that there's a bunch of soldier defectors that are in the Wutai temple, and when you meet Angeal and Director Lazard, he lets you in on a missing soldier first-class operative called Genesis. With the mission in limbo, they bring Zack into the fold to end the war with Wutai, and Angeal has given Zack his recommendation to be upgraded to first class. When Zack and Angeal have infiltrated the Wutai compound at Mount Tamblin, Angeal mentions that if Zack is aware of what a dumb apple is, after you get a quick history lesson on why they grow at random times, it's off to the temple to end the uprising of the Wutai. As part of this mission, it is asked that you defeat as many Wutai as possible, as this will help your soldier evaluation. Not a lot of pressure here, right? Thankfully, this part is very easy to clean up until you get to the boss section. However, before you get there, you run into the child Yuffie, who Zack plays along with and acts beat up in order to get her out of the way. Once you get into the arena, you're met with two monsters and the game teaches you about enemy abilities. While you think you finished them off, they come back to attack Zack, and Angeal comes to the rescue and makes a joke about him being more important than the sword, but just a little. Lazard congratulates Zack on a job well done and notifies him that he'll meet Sephiroth, who is at this point a hero and someone Zack clearly aspires to be like. After you escort Lazard to safety, you get to battle your first summon of the game in Ifrit. Ifrit provided a decent challenge to me personally, and they clearly have Zack on the ropes before Sephiroth comes in to deal the finishing blow in cinematic fashion. Now this is where things start to get weird. As Sephiroth examines the corpses and takes off the mask, they reveal to be clones of Genesis, the missing first-class soldier. Sephiroth feels Angeal has betrayed them, and Zack refuses to believe his friend would turn his back on the soldier program. From what you are led to believe, it does not seem to be in character for Angeal to do such a thing, as he so highly values his honor. As you return back to Shinra HQ, Lazard asks Zack to investigate Genesis' hometown, and tells him not to trust his family, and I don't know why Zack felt so confused by this notion, but in the moment I thought it was pretty funny, with him basically going, "Oh, okay, right, I see you then." Song of the Turks is asked to go along with Zack to ensure this mission also goes smoothly. As an aside, the game itself recommends you finish some side missions before you continue on, like unlocking Ifrit by fighting it in a rematch. Now, you don't have to do this, of course, but it does make the game go a lot smoother if you just take the time to unlock the summon and some Mako stones. Once Zack and Song are in Benora, and you make your way through the Genesis copies and the droids, you see the dumb apple tree Angeal was talking about, and Zack thinks back to when Angeal told him he never had to steal because he knew the wealthy landowner's son, his son being Genesis, of course. They both grew up together and were best friends. As Song investigates a grave nearby, Zack looks to find where Angeal's parents are. He finds an older woman sitting at a table, who immediately is able to recognize him as Zack the puppy, since Angeal wrote to his mother about him. He got his nickname for having zero attention span and being energetic like a puppy. Angeal's mother alludes to Genesis having came back to town and killing the townspeople, and mentioning how good of a person he actually used to be. It's really hard to fathom him actually being a good person if he's going back home and killing people outright, in my opinion. Angeal has also left his sword behind in his search for Genesis. His mother mentions the sword is his family symbol for honor, so I interpreted this as Angeal leaving his honor behind as a hero in order to stop the chaos that Genesis had perpetuated on Benora. When you meet Song overlooking the Benora factory, he says that Genesis's parents were the ones in the freshly dug grave. It's pretty messed up, honestly, not only going back to your hometown to kill people, but also to kill your parents. Genesis has truly lost the plot at this point. Sephiroth, after finding out about this, couldn't bring himself to do the mission, so he recommended Zack to do the job for him. Once you've broken into the factory, you see Genesis reciting lines from Loveless in the most ominous way, and calling Zack the puppy much to his surprise. Genesis tells Song and Zack that his parents had betrayed him, and they always had from the very beginning, so he took them out of the equation. Enraged, Zack tries to attack him, but Angeal stops him and lets him escape. When you go back to Angeal's house to check on his mother, she's already dead, and Angeal gets attacked by Zack and has his honor questioned, to which Angeal alludes to have his mother simply not being able to live, and neither can her son. I interpreted this initially as a sort of cursed bloodline, which to a degree is not far off. Genesis then tells Zack that he can't continue living this way and summons Bahamut in another summon battle, which was honestly a lot of fun. After you've handled the battle, Zack yells at Genesis that summons can't be used like that, and he should fight with honor, to which Genesis says there is no honor in monsters, as monsters have neither dreams nor do they have any honor. Showing exactly why he is a monster, he shoots out a single black wing and disappears while Zack escapes and Shinra bombs the village to clear any evidence. At this point, Zack is still in disbelief that any soldier would be capable of doing things that monsters do as he stares at a feather falling from Genesis. When you get back to HQ, Lazard doesn't want you to take out Angeal and Genesis' cohorts, since they're compromised, and let the army handle it. Shinra is then attacked by Genesis clones and sweepers. Once you clear out Shinra, you end up in Sector 8 and have to rescue Cissnei from a G Eraser, which at this point is the first time you have to fight a copy of this strength. This fight is pretty straightforward if you utilize the blocking and dodging in the G Eraser's combo attacks. Simply just remember to stay aggressive when G is building up its power attacks, and it won't be a problem. Once you deal with the G Eraser, Cissnei tells you that when she was a kid, she wanted to have wings like an angel. But after Zack seeing what he's seen, he feels they represent that of a monster more so than an angel. Cissnei feels that it is a representation of people who have freedom in their lives. My opinion in regards to this specifically is that Cissnei does have a point in wings representing freedom, as Genesis has freed himself from Shinra, and while he has killed and become a monster, this is how he is choosing to utilize that freedom. Once you have completed this section, Sephiroth calls Zack and tells him to meet in Reactor 5 where Angeal has been seen. Concerned by this, Zack asks if they're going to have to kill him, to which Sephiroth notes they will fail to capture him on purpose. While in the reactor and killing your first enemy, it's blatantly obvious that something is wrong. You start to see Angeal's face in the monster and a chill goes down your spine. What really does all this mean? It is at this point you learn about Project G, degradation, and the Ancients. What this means exactly is that they are implanting cells of an ancient being into a human fetus to give the fetus ancient abilities, and Hollander is the one responsible for doing these experiments. In the notes, it is mentioned there are genetic leaks specific to the Soldier G program. Sephiroth tells Zack that before Genesis left, he had sustained an injury and it wasn't healing properly. As Hollander was treating Genesis, he tells Angeal and Sephiroth that some Mako energy got into the wound and he needs a transfusion. However, the strange thing of it is, Angeal pushes Sephiroth out of the way and says he's not a suitable candidate. This understandably causes some internal conflict with one of Soldier's, top soldiers. You also learn from the research notes that the life form Shinra excavated was indeed an ancient. You also find out that Project G created Genesis. Makes sense, right? Hollander is very clear within that both Genesis and Angeal are degrading. In true antagonistic fashion, Genesis descends from above, allowing Hollander to run away like a coward. Genesis recites another line from Loveless, but one particular piece stands out to me. There is no hate, only joy for you, are beloved by the goddess. Alright, so what goddess? Why is he so admired by them? To this point, he's simply just a hero. Well, we'll soon find out. Though Genesis seems to think he is the hero of his own story, and Loveless is a template, he is quite clearly deranged. Genesis also wants to obtain the gift of the goddess, and seems to think that Sephiroth may know how to get it. I have to be honest that the whole chasing Hollander thing was really ridiculous, and it wasn't really necessary, but after that piece is done, you get to meet Angeal, and he shows Zack that he too is becoming a monster, that this is not the same color wing as Genesis. Zack feels he is more of an angel than a monster. Angeal then questions Zack what do angels dream of. He then says to be human, and swiftly punches Zack in the gut. All this is done to buy Hollander more time. The next section opens up with Zack having fallen through the church in the slums and meeting Aerith. From here we basically go on a sort of mini-quest with Aerith to get Zack's wallet back, which I think was kind of unnecessary, but it's over pretty quickly thankfully. This section of the game in my opinion was used more of a bridge to the burgeoning conflict with Genesis and attacking Shinra, but I also appreciated the time I was able to take away from the craziness and further building the dynamic relationship between Zack and Aerith, and it also further helped me appreciate the characters and flesh them out more and showcase their ever-blossoming relationship. As we are called back to Shinra, things are starting to unravel, and Zack has to traverse back to the highway through multiple monster encounters. Here, we start to also encounter some of the newer variations of the G-monsters, which also provided a nice bump in challenge since, to this point, I was feeling like things were almost a bit too easy. Once you've handled the G-monsters, Angeal descends down from above to ask Zack for help, and he still wants to help protect his honor, even after all that's happened. When you make it to Shinra, Sephiroth is taking out G-copies, and Angeal mentions that Hollander plans to assassinate Hojo, who's the head of the Shinra science department, and Hollander feels that Shinra fucked him over, and he should be the one in his very position. What better way to make your case than to attack your former employer? As Zack meets with the demented Hojo, he's rather unimpressed by Zack and tells him not to think and just to follow orders. A curious Zack then pushes a button to unleash some of Hojo's creations, and you have to beat them all within a time limit, or you're going to be reported and punished for not following orders. Once that's out of the way, Genesis appears, and Hojo calls him out for working with Hollander in hopes of stopping his degradation. As expected, Genesis swoops in to recite another line from Loveless, and Hojo is hopeful the two friends, Angeal and Genesis, fighting will help him with his research. After Genesis blows open the side of the lab and recites another line from Loveless, we enter into probably my favorite summon battle in Crisis Core with Bahamut Fury, and I loved watching the Exaflare animation since it's so over the top. After the fight is finished and everyone is gone, you make it back into Shinra, where you're told Sephiroth has locked himself in the data room and is researching the history of Shinra's science department. Even though Aerith calls Zack, we get intercepted by Song and are called to investigate Modeoheim. Here, we meet a new Shinra operative, Cloud, and they both seem to hit it off quite well. Cloud is very interested in joining Soldier, and Zack provides some words of encouragement. Zack, Cloud, and Song head to the Mako excavation site to do a little stealth mission, which was hilariously easy, but added a nice little change of pace to the game. Once you get inside, Genesis has Hollander cornered and wants to know where he can get his hands on the Genova cells. With Cloud then going after Hollander, Zack battles Genesis solo. This fight also temporarily shuts down your DMW, and is essential that you keep your guard up and use items, since MP can be stolen, and it took me a few tries, but honestly it was a great fight. Eventually, Zack manages to kill Genesis, or does he really? And he falls into the abyss, reciting Loveless, saying, "If this seeks my destruction, it goes with me." I'll have my thoughts on this a little later, but for now, the story progresses. When Zack runs into Angeal in the bathhouse, he tells Zack that it should have been him to deal with Genesis, and not Zack, which understandably leaves Zack puzzled. Before they begin to duel, Hollander enters and tells Angeal and Zack about Angeal's checkered past, and we learn that Project G was based off Jillian, who is Angeal's mother. We learn that his mother had been implanted with Genova cells, and Genesis was the one who was given the Genova cells as an infant, even though it was deemed a failure. We also find out that Angeal was bred inside Jillian's body. All this is pretty messed up, right? We also find out that Angeal's traits can be passed onto other monsters, and he then fuses with all the Angeal-faced monsters we have seen to this point in this game, thus creating Angeal penance. Personally, this fight was a huge pain in the ass for me since I kept getting caught with his sword swing radius, but after a few tries I was able to beat him. The significance of beating your mentor in battle cannot be overstated. In the post-battle scene, the sun sets in the background as Angeal lay dying and thanking Zack for everything. The Buster Sword is then passed from mentor to student in a passing of the guard moment, illustrating Zack's personal growth on his journey to be a hero like Angeal was. Also notice in this scene, Zack recites Angeal's line about heroes having dreams and honor as the rain falls and he cries. This is just a powerful moment in this game, as he laments his loss, and it cuts to Aerith talking about the sky above as she comforts Zack through his grieving process. Now back at Shinra, Zack is looking upon his Buster Sword and realizing it's his time now to change his future and embrace his dreams as he walks away. Now in front of a group of Shinra rookies, he advises the group to embrace their dreams in their honor, thus concluding the chapter with lots of highs and lows to this point. After apprehending Hollander, Shinra sort of goes into a state of turmoil as the Turks are constantly following Zack, and he wonders what is there even left to fight for, as both Angeal and Genesis are but a memory among the Shinra employees. While enjoying some much needed R&R, Zack gets attacked at Costa del Sol by Genesis copies, and Song speculates Genesis is controlling the copies from the livestream. In this section, you finally get to use the Buster Sword and get some new abilities to go along with it. After you save the townsfolk from the attacks, we learn that Director Lazard has been absent, and there's also no chain of command at Shinra. We've also learned that Hollander has escaped as we fight our way through the gauntlet of tanks and G enemy types. Once we finally corner Hollander, this dude again gets bailed out by Genesis copies. Sephiroth then questions if we really did kill Genesis, but there's no way we didn't, right? We literally watched him die. Sephiroth alludes to the device Hollander was using being stolen, and sends Zack off to Modeoheim with the Turks to clean up the rest of Junon. The scene cuts to Genesis predictably again reciting Loveless. However, what he says plays a part later in the story, and seemingly fulfills his prophecy. While back in the slums, Zack and Aerith meet an Angeal copy in the form of a wolf of sorts. They are attacked by Shinra in the church, but strangely the Angeal copy protects Zack and Aerith, which makes you wonder if he is in fact still alive. After this, Zack and Aerith finally make the flower wagon with a series of side quests to tide us over until we continue on with the main quests. As Sephiroth calls us back to Shinra HQ, we are told that Lazard, Hollander, and Genesis have potentially been in cahoots together as a device was stolen and tied back to Lazard. Depending on the information that turns up, Sephiroth may also leave Shinra in the soldier program, as he has understandably felt lied to this point. Once Zack, Cloud, and Sephiroth arrive in Nibelheim, we start to see Sephiroth beginning to crack as the soldiers ask him about his hometown and his family, and he can't recall a father to speak of or hometown, only that his mother's name was Jenova, but she had died. We also get to meet a young Tifa for the first time during this mission. Tifa also serves as the guide for the town, and she takes them all over the area until they reach the Nibel reactor, and then shit starts to really hit the fan. Remember earlier when Sephiroth said that his mother was Jenova? Well, here she is, and she's surrounded by monsters made from Mako experiments by Hojo. We also learn that Zack is Mako enhanced, but is still human, and so are the other members of Soldier. When Zack asks Sephiroth if he was made the same way, he becomes visibly agitated. He even questions if he's human at all. To add insult to injury, Genesis appears and calls him a monster, and the greatest spawn of the Jenova project. Further driving the point, he lays it in on Sephiroth that he's never actually met his mother, and she was excavated from a 2,000-year-old rock, and she's a monster. Jenova Project G was used to create both Angeal and Genesis, while Project S was, well, you guessed it, used to create Sephiroth. His body is also incapable of degradation like Angeal and Genesis as well. Pretty big revelations have now taken place, and if I were in Sephiroth's position, I can't say I would have been in the best mental state either, but he simply walks away from Zack and Genesis, and leaves you to battle all the way back to Nibelheim. When you finally get to rest, Zack and Cloud have a nice little heart-to-heart, and Zack learns what is important to him. Cloud mentions he likes his sword for a little foreshadowing moment there as well. In the morning, Tifa lets Zack know that Sephiroth is in Shinra Manor, and he goes to confront him. With Sephiroth reading research notes, he learns that Jenova isn't ancient in the subsequent timeline of this project. And on the 7th day, all hell breaks loose. In a shocking display, the town of Nibelheim is leveled in a blaze. In one of the most iconic scenes in gaming, Sephiroth smirks at Zack, and it walks through the flames, beckoning him to pursue. To this day, this moment still sends chills down my spine, and the gravitas cannot be understated. As Zack reaches the Nibel reactor, Tifa is hurt and saying how much she hates Shinra, Soldier, and everyone. All of these emotions are totally justified as her town was just burnt to the ground with zero regard for life. Bursting his way into the chamber, Zack sees Sephiroth and Jenova together, and Sephiroth states he's ready to take over the planet. He is on full-on god complex at this point, and now views everyone as stupid and inferior, and is totally unhinged. Now we enter one hell of a boss fight after Zack gets knocked off the platform of Jenova. This is a 2-phase boss fight, and for me the keys were to have my barrier maxed, to use Piraga and Dark Blizzard materia, and constantly healing while Sephiroth is super aggressive for the whole first phase. If you spam Dark Blizzard during his build-up of Octoslash, you can manage to not die in one hit. For the second phase, it's just you and Sephiroth on a platform, and I cannot emphasize this enough, but you need to stay aggressive and do not allow him to push you off or it's game over. Use of the barrier and elemental attacks are what got me through, and it wasn't easy, but it was a satisfying fight to finish. After the conflict is resolved, Zack is knocked out of the Jenova chamber and Cloud rushes in to help his fallen friend, and is mortally wounded by Sephiroth. In a show of total badassery, Cloud takes a sword strike to the chest and lifts and throws Sephiroth away as he falls into the abyss with Jenova's head. With Zack and Cloud now both critically injured, Hojo takes him to be experimented on, with his attention mainly on Cloud. The next chapter opens with Angeal telling Zack he has tarnished the soldier name and flies away. Zack has a dream that he sees one of Angeal's feathers, and breaks out of the Mako tank he was captive in. Like a badass, Zack carries Cloud all the way out of Shinra Manor and back to an inn on the outskirts of town. Also, I have to be honest about this sniper section. I feel it was done as a change of pace, and that's totally fine, but I'd rather have just smashed my way through everything with a Buster Sword, and it was honestly easy enough, I just don't care for it. After you've gotten through this, Cissnei acts like she's going to take Zack in, but instead gives Cloud and him time to escape. With Cloud in tow, they make it to the highway before getting stopped by Genesis, who finds out that Zack has the power within him to stop the degradation. However, this has unintended side effects, and one of the G monsters mutates into an abomination, and thus giving you another challenging mini-boss fight before progressing to the next point in Gongaga. After you make it to Gongaga, Cissnei again helps Zack with some intel and advises that Angeal has been found, and Zack goes to find him. Before that though, we finally get to deal with Hollander once and for all, who has degraded considerably and has his own wing, and has even experimented on himself. He mentions that it's a necessary evil to survive since Genesis almost killed him. Genesis also tells Zack that both him and Cloud have pure S cells, and even though the final act is unknown, Genesis feels his theory is a correct one, And the answer lies within the livestream. Both him and Hollander escape, unfortunately, and we are rushed back to help Cloud. The boss fight with Hollander for me was a bit irritating, since he kept spawning his worms en masse, and while they're not particularly hard to kill, it made the battle way more tedious and allowed him to hit you with higher level charged attacks. Once it was over though, it was quite a relief because I was so tired of chasing him through the game, only for him to escape at the last second. A real twist for new players is we learned that this Angeal that saved us was in fact Lazard, and from the beginning of the game, it would have been hard to pick up since there are some subtle cues that you can easily miss if you're not paying attention. Lazard also tells us that he wanted to get his revenge, so he was the one who helped Hollander get out of Junon. He also wants to save the world and is simply not out for revenge, and that includes helping both Zack and Genesis. Much to my surprise, Lazard asks Zack what his dream is, and Zack mentions it's to be a hero. Lazard feels this is unattainable, but with the help of Lazard and Angeal, it can become a reality. Zack is able to assume where Genesis is by remembering his heritage from the Benora apple Genesis left for him. Back in Benora, Zack enters the ruins to search for Genesis. This is one of the cooler areas of the game for me as well, and you can feel in the atmosphere things are coming to a head. Lazard keeps watch over Cloud while we explore the ruins for Genesis. We then see Genesis's desk with awards for the Benora apple juice in his notes. Genesis as a youth came up with the idea to make apple juice himself, and had dreams to serve the apples to his hero Sephiroth. Exploring the Benora caves, you have to collect the goddess stones to open up a sealed door that's closed by magic. You basically have to go to each corner of the map from the entry point to the lake and collect your stones, and place them in the altar to beat the G Regicide in battle in order to proceed to the next point. It really sounds easy enough, but there's no way to know where all the stones are without properly looking in each corner of the areas and killing the G monsters. As for the G Regicide itself, I mainly kept my distance and did onesie-twosie attacks, spammed heal and dark ice until it died, but is on the more annoying side if I'm to be honest. Onto the final boss fight with Genesis, he's waiting for us next to the livestream and claiming that Zack has fulfilled the prophecy and succeeded Angeal's spirit, and part of Sephiroth is with you, meaning the S-cells which he covets. Thus, the three friends are reunited once again, paying homage to Loveless and the game's title as well. Next, Genesis takes on the gift of the goddess and transforms into a monstrosity, and wants to achieve his end goal of joining the livestream in his twisted way. No thanks, I'd rather not. The Genesis Avatar boss fight was honestly really awesome, and that it felt like it took everything I had in my disposal to beat him. The Avatar's weak to electric, ice, and fire-based attacks, and you should already have these maxed at this point or close to it, so spam away at the Avatar before it sends out the G-Shadows, which are frankly a pain in the ass, and the sword slams with an area of attack, dealing damage. When the Avatar is charging up for this ability power, I simply spammed Thundara, and it never killed me, and I rolled out of the way of any elemental spells it cast upon me. On phase 2, you go one-on-one with Genesis in a sword battle, which is pretty intense. And Genesis alludes he was aware of the plot from the beginning, as if you needed any more motivation to kill him. Genesis really stays aggressive during this fight and uses Flash, Twister Strike, Dancing Sword, and Apocalypse. Same applies for this fight as well. You quickly need to attack and then dodge the melee strikes whilst doing full magic spam on the attack power buildup. After the final blow is dealt, the statue in the distance changes into Minerva, and she sees his desire to complete his duty as soldier in the will of the livestream. She does not kill him, allowing Zack to carry him out of the cave. Zack takes a bite of the apples, and so fulfilling Genesis' childhood dream. As the copies of Angeal fade into the livestream, Zack carries a Mako poisoned Cloud away. Two soldier first-class members also come to take Genesis away to potentially become their brother. These two are later revealed to be Weiss and Nero. Back at Shinra, Song orders Cisne to keep Cloud and Zack alive, so Song can give him the letters, presumably from Aerith. Reno and Root are tasked with giving the package to Zack if they can get to him in time. As you might imagine, they do not. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments I can think of in a recent JRPG, Zack leaves Cloud behind to keep safe and is confronted by an army of Shinra infantrymen. What he says next ties back into what he said to him at the beginning of the game by Angeal. Embrace your dreams, protect your honor as soldier. No matter what you do, there is wave after wave of infantry to take out, and you lose your DMW after taking enough damage. I should note that the last image you see in the DMW is of Aerith, so you know that Zack is thinking about her while he's taking his last breath, and that in and of itself is honestly really sad. On his last legs, you're just being sprayed with endless gunfire as you struggle to kill the infantry. Eventually you are shot point blank, ruthlessly, as images of Aerith show on the screen pulling your heartstrings. As if it couldn't get more heartbreaking, Zack lay exhaling his final breath as Cloud crawls his way to Zack. He draws him close and pushes him into his chest and says he will live for both of them. If you weren't crying at this point, then I commend you, as this hit me extremely hard. With Zack's blood on his face, he is given the Buster Sword and told to honor his dreams as they are his now, and we are shown images of their time together showing how special of a hero Zack was, and that he really did embrace his dreams, even if he died doing so. As the sun shines down, Cloud tells Zack that he won't forget to embrace his dreams, and he won't forget them, and thanks Zack for all he's done. I also interpreted this as a new era beginning with the sun shining down upon Cloud, as he takes over ownership of the Buster Sword and forges his own path in Zack's honor, precluding the events that happened in Final Fantasy VII with Shinra and Sephiroth. It is achieved. As Zack is lifted to the heavens with what appears to be an angel with wings, Cloud is carrying the Buster Sword below. One of Angeal's feathers coasts across the screen, and Zack asks if he is to become a hero. Once more, we hit right in the feels. Excellent job with this, Square. Our post-credit scene is basically the beginning of the original Final Fantasy VII, as Cloud is on a Shinra transport with a Buster Sword as a Shinra first-class soldier. This is an excellent way to close the game out. Now that we've discussed the story, let's talk about the character arcs of Zack, Sephiroth, Genesis, and Angeal. The trio of Zack, Sephiroth, and Genesis, in my opinion, Zack really has the best arc, even if it ended in death. When we first see him, he is new to Shinra, and looks up to Angeal and wishes to be just like him since he seems to be a great person. Zack also forms powerful relationships with Cloud and Aerith, which added to a more personal side of the story. Zack cherishes his connections with people like Cissnei, and such connections would later help him in his missions after exiling from Shinra in the soldier program. Through all the turmoil going on with Fort Tamblin to Venora, Zack always remained upbeat and positive in the face of adversity. I feel he not only did this because he thought Angeal would do the same, but because it was his dream and he wanted to change the future of others for a better future than the one present. Through all the betrayal and lies, he shows Cloud just what it is to be a hero, to not fall to corruption or lust for power like Genesis. Zack even went as far as appealing to Genesis when he ate the Benora apple to complete the Loveless poem, even if he personally didn't agree with it. I should also note that facing death, he still carried Cloud through impossible circumstances, as for both of them had been experimented on for years. Truly amazing character growth for Zack end to end. Regarding Genesis, he started out as a mysterious AWOL soldier operative who had gone missing, but as the story progressed, he evolved into a more anime-type villain, reciting the Loveless poem at every opportunity. Initially, this may seem kind of cheesy, but for this game it helped add some nuance to him instead of just being a more simple-minded villain. You understand why he went mad and wanted revenge, as he was born of an experiment, and when he found out about the lie, he killed his parents and wanted to burn Shinra to the ground. Honestly, I really can't blame him for that. Given he pulled out all the stops to stop himself from dying, can we really say that we would not do the same ourselves when put in the face of death? He's also basically a failed version of Sephiroth, and when you consider very few experiments work out right the first time, it played well into the story with Angeal as well, since Angeal took it another way, which I'll discuss next. With Angeal, his main shtick is constantly battling the am I human or am I a monster dynamic. Throughout the whole story, he cared about Zack to the end, and was always questioning what was really right and wrong, and that can really weigh on a person who ultimately just wants to do the right thing. It no doubt would have been hard learning about the origins of Project G, and subsequently knowing they aren't really real in the sense that you aren't the same as your friend Zack. He asks himself, why do angels dream within the story? And I also interpret that as him not fully conceding that he is a monster, and he has the freedom to choose his path, which he does in saving Zack and Aerith from Shinra, and later watching over Cloud to ensure safety, thus rejecting the path that Genesis was going down. He is a really cool character, and even to get just a little bit more development out of him throughout the story would have been cool, but he was certainly not an insignificant character by any means in Crisis Core. Finally, onto Sephiroth, where Angeal has a nice end to his arc. Sephiroth has a far more tragic one. From early on, we are told this is basically the chosen one of Soldier First Class program, and a hero to all. He had Zack and Angeal respecting him and his contributions to Shinra at that point. You do feel bad for him, as he has no recollection of a family other than his mother Genova, who he had never really met, and never had a father figure in his life, which weighs on him as well. Was he wrong in burning Nibelheim to the ground and going to war against the planet? Absolutely he was. But put yourself in his shoes and come to the grips that your mother was basically an alien life form, and you were a test tube baby, and are more powerful than anyone on the planet. His insanity is understandable, but his actions are deplorable considering how many lives are affected by his actions and the loss of trust. In his eventual quest to become God, which, as we know from the events of Final Fantasy VII, I ask you this, was it really worth it? Now, let's cover one thing I think can be somewhat confusing, and that is the theme of the game. From the very onset of the game, there's a strong hint that following your dreams is the key thematic point. Two quotes that point to this are when Lazard says, "Unobtainable dreams are the best kind." Zack at this point was confused by this, but in the end, Lazard was wrong, as Zack in my eyes did end up becoming a hero. Zack wanted to help and save people, but did not have a lot of believers in him. Another quote from Angeal that also relates to a theme in this game is that honor can be quite a burden at times. This applies to both Zack and Angeal. as Angeal for when it's constantly battling with his inner monster and should take sides with Genesis or keep training and helping Zack, of whom he is aligned with morally speaking. Lastly, there's another quote: while it may be dark in nature, it's profound for what Crisis Core as a game stands for, and for Final Fantasy VII as well. When Zack is dying, he says to Cloud, "My honor and my dreams are now yours." Cloud embraces this fully and realizes these dreams at the end of Final Fantasy VII, and has changed the future in a way that Zack would have wanted. For this section of the video, I want to talk to you about my thoughts on the gameplay and upgrades, as you may not be familiar with it if you've never played the original Crisis Core. Personally, this is a tremendous selling point of the game for me. If you've played the original Crisis Core, you know that combat could be just a little clunky. In Reunion, the combat has been revamped to be more akin to the Final Fantasy VII Remake and feels way more fluid and less like a chore. These side missions for me were also a breeze, and you know that you can get them out of the way and get yourself the materia that you need leveled proper quickly if you focus on the right ones. I would also like to mention that using the summons with the DMW system is kind of like a lottery as to how powerful your attack is going to end up, but it is always a blast unleashing Ifrit and watching his animation trigger to deal massive amounts of damage. The DMW modulating phase no longer pauses the game and allows things to flow more freely in combat, so that aspect has become much less annoying. The limit breaks also do not trigger automatically like they used to in the original, another small quality of life change that makes a big difference. They also added a nice auto-save feature, and save points automatically restore HP, MP, and AP for free. Another note about side missions is that they're graded by star ranking, so it makes it easier to find which ones to skip. Another important thing to mention is the graphics have gotten a huge overhaul and look amazing when compared to the original. There's also an update to the voice actors like Zack and Aerith. I know this might be unpopular, but I love the new changes to the voice actors, and even though Zack at the early stages of the game was maybe a little cringy, it sort of felt like they were rushing him to do his lines. I could be wrong about that, but this is only my opinion on the matter. In terms of remasters, this is one of the best ones I've ever played, and Square honestly did a fantastic job with Crisis Core Reunion, so honestly, bravo Square. For a game that I never expected to play in 2022, Crisis Core Reunion has been an excellent experience to be able to play again after all these years from its original PSP release. Even though the game is on the shorter side, it is definitely filled with action from start to finish, and if you've never tried it before, I would highly recommend it, as you can now play it on multiple platforms. You really appreciate these characters as well, as they're all well written, and the game's combat and mechanics are also very engaging and fun. I would definitely say this is one of my favorite things to play in 2022, and also among Final Fantasy games, it's among my favorites as well. I hope that you've enjoyed my video, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's keep this channel growing. StarSoldier17, out.